Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the reality of organ transplants, move into the anatomy of both kidney and liver transplants, then tackle the heart, lungs, and bowel, and finally wrap up with the science of organ rejection. Let's get to it. Section 1, the reality of organ transplants. So, forget that cinematic drama we just talked about. Real surgical retrieval is a hyper-sterile, incredibly high-stakes operation. The exact moment an organ is harvested and put on ice, a relentless clock starts ticking. We call this cold ischemia time. And to beat this clock, cities will actually create what are called green corridors. They literally stop all traffic and provide police escorts to rush the ambulance from the landing strip directly to the hospital doors. There are absolutely no surgeons casually chatting on their phones while haphazardly suturing. It is pure, methodical precision. To really understand organ sourcing, we need to look at the 4 distinct types of grafts. First, autografts, that's using your own tissue, like a skin graft. Then you have isografts, which come from an identical twin. Allografts, taking an organ from one human to give to another, well, that makes up the bulk of what we're discussing today. But then there's the xenograft. This is where we push the absolute boundaries of science by crossing the species barrier. And yes, porcine or pig heart valves have literally been saving human lives for years. Now, when medical teams are sourcing from deceased donors, they don't just guess what's viable. They rely entirely on the monstrous classification. If a patient is dead on arrival, that's a type 1, it's an uncontrolled situation. So really only highly resilient tissues like corneas or heart valves can be saved. The major lifesavers are types 3 and 4. In these controlled settings, like an anticipated cardiac arrest, surgical teams actually have the vital time they need to carefully preserve and harvest all major organs, potentially saving multiple lives. Here is a crucial takeaway. Organs do not just sit on regular ice. They are preserved at exactly 4 degrees centigrade in a highly specific chemical cocktail known as the UW, or University of Wisconsin, solution. This stuff is an absolute game changer. It's packed with adenosine, which literally feeds energy to the starving organ cells. You've got lactobionate stepping in as a critical stabilizer. Meanwhile, glutathione and allopurinol are acting like biological security guards. They are free radical scavengers, sweeping up destructive molecules that form during transport. This exact mixture is the secret sauce that makes modern transplant logistics possible. Section 2. Anatomy of kidney transplants. When it comes to kidneys, surgeons have a very specific preference, and they use serious tech to make the call. They run a MAG-3 isotope scan to measure the differential glomerular filtration rate, or GFR. Basically, they need to know the exact filtering speed of each kidney. If the donor's left kidney is doing 70% of the work, you obviously can't take it. But assuming both function equally, surgeons will almost always grab the left kidney. Why? Because it naturally has a longer renal vein. That extra length provides vital slack, which makes the incredibly delicate suturing process in the recipient a whole lot easier. This right here brilliantly highlights the tactical differences in surgery depending on where the organ comes from. When taking a kidney from a deceased donor, surgeons can actually take a little piece of the aorta with it, called an aortic patch. This allows them to attach the new renal artery directly into the site of the recipient's external iliac artery. But obviously, you can't go taking a piece of a living donor's aorta. So for a live donation, they have to do a precise end-to-end connection. And they specifically use the internal iliac artery, completely avoiding the external one so they don't compromise the blood supply to the patient's leg. It's pure anatomical strategy. Section 3. Anatomy of liver transplants. Now, moving to the liver, the surgical options become incredibly innovative. Take the split liver transplant. Because there's this massive, constant shortage of donor organs, surgeons figured out how to literally divide a single donor liver to save 2 people simultaneously. They dissect the liver based on its distinct vascular segments. The smaller left lateral segments, that's segments 2 and 3, are perfectly sized for a child. Meanwhile, the much larger remaining mass, segments 4 through 8, has more than enough functional tissue to sustain a fully grown adult. Just think about that. 1 donor, 2 lives saved on the exact same day. Okay, this next one sounds like a plot from a sci-fi novel, but it's totally real. It's a chain reaction known as a domino transplant. Imagine a patient with a systemic disease, like hereditary amyloidosis. Their liver works fine right now, but it's slowly producing a mutant protein that is destroying their other organs. They need a new liver to survive. But their old liver, it might take 7 to 10 years for that disease to actually damage a new host. For someone currently dying on the transplant list, 10 good years is an absolute miracle. So the patient getting the new liver donates their old one to the next person in line. Domino effect. Once that liver is in the operating room, speed and precision are absolutely paramount. You can't just hook the plumbing up at random. Surgeons follow a strict, non-negotiable 5-step sequence. First, they secure the top, the suprahepatic inferior vena cava. Then they secure the bottom, the infrahepatic IVC. Now the organ is firmly anchored. Next, they open the heavy blood flow via the portal vein, right followed by the oxygen-rich hepatic artery. Finally, once the blood is pumping and the liver is nicely pinked up, they reconstruct the bile duct. This discipline keeps the organ's time without oxygen to the absolute bare minimum. Section 4. Heart, lungs, and bowel. Let's look at the thoracic cavity and the gut. Look at the stark differences in these cold ischemia times. A kidney is remarkably resilient. Optimally, it's best under 18 hours, but it can actually survive up to 36 hours on ice at the maximum. But hearts and lungs, whole different ballgame. They have an optimal window of just under 3 hours. If you cross the 6-hour mark, the tissue damage is almost always irreversible. This timeline is exactly why those high-speed police-escorted green corridors we talked about earlier are quite literally a matter of immediate life and death. When a heart arrives, just like the liver, it is stitched in with incredible discipline. Surgeons always begin with a left atrium. Why? To immediately anchor the inflow of freshly oxygenated blood coming from the lungs. Then, they quickly follow with the right atrium, the pulmonary artery, and they finish with a massive aorta to push that blood back out to the rest of the body. Every single stitch is thrown knowing that tiny 6-hour window is rapidly slamming shut. Now, here is a fascinating detail. Say you need to check if a patient's body is rejecting their brand new heart. You'd think that requires a massive surgery, right? Actually, no. They don't crack the chest open again. Cardiologists navigate a tiny biopsy tool straight through the jugular vein in the patient's neck, down into the heart itself, and they snip a tiny piece of the inner lining. It's called a subendocardial biopsy. It is an ingenious, minimally invasive way to get a direct look at the cells to see how the graft is doing. Now, while kidney and liver survivals have skyrocketed, small bowel transplants are uniquely stubborn. They have much lower survival rates, and here is why. The gut is practically an immune organ itself. It is absolutely packed with donor lymphoid tissue. So when you implant it, those donor white blood cells can literally wake up and attack the heavily immunosuppressed recipient. We call that graft versus host disease. Add in the fact that ischemia makes the bowel walls leaky, allowing normal gut bacteria to spill out and cause massive infections, and you quickly see why the intestine is one of the hardest organs to successfully transplant. Section 5. The science of organ rejection. Ultimately, the universal threat to any transplant is the body's own immune system. Rejection isn't just a single event. It's categorized entirely by the clock. Surgeons classify the enemy based on when it strikes. Hyperacute rejection happens incredibly fast, literally within minutes, while the patient is still on the operating table. Acute rejection usually rears its head within the first 6 months, as the immune system slowly figures out there is an intruder. And chronic rejection? That's the slow burn failure that happens after 6 months. Let's break down the mechanics of each. Hyperacute rejection is the ultimate nightmare scenario. It means the patient had preformed antibodies already locked and loaded to attack the donor's HLA, which is basically the body's genetic barcode. It causes a type 2 hypersensitivity reaction. This triggers immediate, massive blood clots, literally turning the organ dusky and dead right there in the OR. Luckily, intense modern genetic matching makes this incredibly rare today. Acute rejection is far more common, but because it's usually driven by T cells, it responds beautifully to heavy immunosuppression. Chronic rejection, though, is a gradual type 4 hypersensitivity, and unfortunately, just tweaking standard drugs usually won't stop it. When chronic rejection does set in, it takes a severe physical toll on the microanatomy of the organ. And it's actually the most common type of renal rejection we face today, often triggered if the patient had a rocky history of acute rejection early on. If you look under a microscope, you see very specific cellular destruction. In the kidneys, it causes glomerulosclerosis, a severe hardening and scarring of the tiny filtering units. In the liver, the bile ducts actually undergo sclerosis and disappear entirely. It's aptly named vanishing duct syndrome. But listen, despite all these intense risks, here is the incredible news. Modern immunosuppression has skyrocketed the 1-year graft survival rate for renal transplants to well over 90%. That is a staggering achievement. Think about it. Despite the immense surgical complexities, the absolute race against ischemia time, and the constant looming threat of 3 different types of immunological rejection, the science works. Decades of refining these drugs and protocols mean the vast majority of patients walk out of the hospital with a functioning, life-saving organ. So it leaves us with this profound thought to wrap up the explainer. With survival rates soaring this high, what is the next massive medical leap required to finally, completely eliminate the global organ shortage once and for all? We know the surgical techniques work flawlessly. Split livers and domino transplants prove our ingenuity, but the demand still heavily outweighs the supply. Is the answer going to be advanced xenografts? Will it be 3D printed, lab grown tissues? Whatever the future holds, the foundation of strict, methodical transplant science we've explored today is exactly what's going to get us there. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning what's medically possible.